Hi, I'm Rick Dior, and today we're going to talk about copper snare drums. So over the years, I've owned many copper drums, but I've settled on these drums. I have three of the same drum here. This is a Pearl Marvin Smitty Smith drum from the 1990s. Again, three different ones. And I have a Ludwig Copperphonic here, and this is the classical version of it with the new strainer that I use for orchestra playing, and a Schagerl, I hope that's the way you say it. It's a German drum, the Berliner drum here. You've seen that in a couple of videos, and that's the one below here. So they're all copper. Some are heavier than others. The Pearl drums are much lighter. The Ludwig drum is kind of moderately heavy, and the Schagerl drum is very heavy. So thick shell, reminiscent of a timpani shell, the way it's bowed there. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. So the reason I have three Pearl Marvin Smith drums is I use this drum a lot for studio work and for gigging, and I keep different heads on each so I can swap them out quickly. So on one drum I have Remo Diplomat coated, and the other drum I have, I believe, an Aquarian, their version of an Ambassador head, and finally I have a Calf La Fima head on the other. We'll show you all those. They all sound completely different with the different heads. The heads make a huge difference for these particular drums. Now, copper drums are pretty dark in sound generally. If you want more of a quiet, darker snare drum, copper is a great solution to that. Brass is good as well, but copper is even darker and softer. So it's a drum that's got a particular character to it that lends itself to a lot of situations. So today I'll show you these individual drums, and then I'll play these three with the different heads for you on the drum kit. These drums I'll play for you just on a snare drum stand since they're concert drums, and they both have calf heads, and you got to be careful with those heads, especially these, which are my best calf heads. So again, we'll show you that in a minute. A few little things tell you about both these types of drums here. They all have 10 lugs. The Smitty Smith drum is a 4x14. This Ludwig, I call it a copperphonic, they call it a copper orchestral drum, is also 10 lugs. It's got the tube lug here that you see. It's got their proprietary now Ludwig classical strainer, as you see there, and the Schagerl, or Schagerl, or however you say it, has basically the same snares, which looks to me like wound, almost like guitar string. So, and it's got a Pearl, interestingly enough, Pearl mechanism. So I'm not sure they make their own mechanisms, but that's the strainer on this drum. Okay, very heavy drum. And that is a 5x14 Schagerl. And I think I said the Ludwig is a 6.5x14. All right, so I just wanted to show you these, and now we'll play them each for you, and I'll talk a little more about them. Okay, so I'm here with these two classical drums, the copper drums. On my left, your right, is the Ludwig. I call it a copperphonic, but it's a copper orchestral snare drum. It's a great line of drums they've come out with, and I consulted somewhat with them when they were designing these drums. And I've done some other videos on these drums, and they are fantastic. Great strainer, the great Ludwig shells, they're maple, they're copper, they're brass, so you got a lot of choices. And then this German drum, the Schagerl, I haven't done many videos on this series of drums. Actually, this is the only one I own. They are incredibly expensive, and they're kind of an acquired taste. I have used it over the years here and there, but it's not my most used classical drum, but it does have some very interesting characteristics, as you'll see right now. So I'll play a little for you on each drum. I will dampen the drum as I usually do with this piece of rubber so it doesn't activate. They don't activate each other with the pitch, which they will do. And I'll play them unmuffled, and then I will muffle them. As you'll see, copper drums need a good bit of muffling because of the shell. They ring quite a bit, and it can be an ugly ring sometimes. So we'll play this one first. So these are calf heads, and I'll show you overhead picture of these, at least this one right now and this one in a minute. And let's put a little muffling on it, and I'll play the same kind of mix of rudimental and concert closed rolls. And now I'll tighten the snares just a little. And with the pearl strainer, you can do that on the one end, which is really nice. Now, those of you who haven't played on a calf head, it's a little bit of a different experience. It's a little bit trickier, especially when you're doing concert drumming. You got to work a little bit harder, but it's a much nicer feel and a little bit of a warmer sound. That's why I like them on these copper drums. So you hear that kind of dry sound there. And it's dark. Now, the good news here, with it being a concert drum and it being dark in a bright hall, you can play a little bit louder and get away with it with the conductor, because the conductors normally, they'll always give you the hand when you have to play a really soft snare drum part, you know. So even before you play, you'll get that. So what I try to do is combat that and maybe use a drum that will help me do these kinds of things, either by using a calf head or a particular drum. And a copper drum is great for that because, again, it's a darker sound. It blends really well for certain types of music. Shostakovich, it works great for. Prokofiev, those types of music. All right, so you hear now with the muffling. Now let me show you a little bit of a closer view of the snares here. And these are all the same. And this shell is heavy. I would say this drum probably weighs about a good 15 pounds. And it is sort of a shape of a timpani shell. It comes out. If you've ever played a Zelkova, Canopus Zelkova, same idea. It's that shape. Now, I'm not sure what that does to the sound, but this drum does sound really unique in that way. Now, I have the drum tuned to an A, more or less. Usually, I'll do a G or an A on my 5-inch drums. It's a great drum for Concerto for Orchestra, Bartok. I've used it before for that. It's really pleasing tom sound there. Okay, let's play this a little bit more. And we'll play it without the muffling once again. Now this particular drum isn't as sensitive as some of my other snares at the edge, but it is darker, that's for sure. Okay, so let's look at this Ludwig drum. No muffling. Again, a Lafima calfskin head, a little bit thinner than this one. I have lots of thicknesses of these things, of these heads, and I have a whole collection of them. And I rotate them in and out on my snare drums depending on what I'm doing. So this is without muffling. So this is a beautiful sounding drum, especially in a hall. Not necessarily close mic'd like this, but when you give this some space, it's amazing. Very dark sounding. So we'll muffle this one. Now normally I'll use a heavier muffling for this. I make these pieces of leather and then I just use a binder clip. It's basically free, the price of the leather. My buddy Wiley Sykes kind of invented this. I'm sure other people have done it before, but and he will also make these for me. So they work great, especially on this drum. One of my favorite drums to play on. Never bright, never annoying, just thick. Great sound. So we'll show you some close-ups of this drum. You can go online and see these. They are for sale. They run about $1,000, more or less. And you see the snares here. You've got the curly snares, you've got cable, and you've got wire. And you can switch those out, okay? And no muffler, internal muffler. Now it does have the modern Ludwig strainer there, which I have said before on this channel I don't like. But what Ryan, their head engineer, did was he switched out. He put a cam in there, I should say. So the cam makes it so much smoother. I wish they did that now on all their drums. It'd probably be too expensive. But I am not a fan of this strainer because it's stiff. But they really did a good job on it now with the cam. So it is a heavy drum. It's a big drum. And it's, again, basically a copperphonic. So if you've played a copperphonic, which is a great drum, and, you know, I have used this on drum set. And you can use a concert drum on drum set. There's no reason you can't. The only difference is the snares. You could switch out the snares to all curly snares if you want, or you could just, you know, use it as is. It's not a problem. It's a snare drum, so don't worry about that. This drum I would not use on drum set, the Schagerl, because it'll be a little weird. It sounds a little too dry, but this makes a great drum set drum as well. So let me grab these Smitty Smith drums and play them for you. I'll be right back. All right, so here are two of the Smitty Smith drums. On my left, your right, is the one with the calf head. And on my right, your left, is the one with the Aquarian head. Okay, and then we'll introduce the one with the Diplomat head here in a minute. So you'll notice one thing right away when I play, and I have to tell you up front, is that the calf head and the plastic head, they make it a completely different drum. So this just goes to prove that the biggest part of the sound of the drum is actually the head, well, almost more than anything. All right, so we'll start here with this calf head. So I hope you hear that difference, and if not, we'll play them both for you on. This is a very snarey sounding drum. Kind of like a Ludwig Pioneer snare, but a little bit brighter. And these Marvin Smitty Smith drums, the pearls, have a very thin shell. They're actually not, it's not a heavy drum. It's fairly light. I'd say probably around maybe 5 pounds or so. And so that thinness doesn't give you that it's not as dark as some other copper drums. It's one of the reasons I really, really like it. It's got a lot of pop to it. And a 4-inch drum, that's a great drum. You know, the old Max Roach Gretsch snares back in the day, those were 4-inch drums. It's great for jazz playing if you play a lot of jazz. So a beautiful sounding drum. And I'll play it at the kit here in a minute. Now, let me put up this other one, and I'll substitute it for the calf skin. That's the calf head, by the way. That is one of my favorite calf heads. And we'll play this one. So you see right away the difference there too. Diplomat, very thin head. And this Aquarian is a thicker head. I like to think of it somewhere in between an ambassador and an emperor. And by the way, this head is called a Focus X. I like this head. It's one of the only Aquarian heads that I actually like on snare drum. It's a great head for, you know, the coated version for these kinds of snare drums that ring a lot. Now, normally I will not muffle this particular drum at all. But if you want to hear, because I know some of you are going to say, why didn't you play the drum muffled? So I'll do it. Okay, and you'll hear, but I think it just makes it sound smaller and not as interesting. It definitely loses the liveness of that sound. It's a controlled ring here. So. All right, so the muffling, it's okay. You can really dig in more, but not so great. So what we'll do now is I'll go over to the drum set and I'll play all three of these for you briefly so you can hear the difference between them. And then you can make your decision. But again, these drums are no longer made. I know that you're going to hear it, but you can find them used. They made a lot of them. It wasn't some sort of limited edition 100 run. Probably made about 1,000 of these things. So they're out there. I would think most people keep them because they're great drums. And they were low priced. So, you know, I would think a fair price for these would be anywhere from $500 to $700 now, just because it's a great drum. It's no longer made. You might be able to find a drum. I haven't played every copper drum made for sure. So you might be able to find a drum that's similar, but this particular size, a 4x14 thin shell copper snare drum with the right head, is an amazing snare, as you'll hear on the kit here in a second. So here we are at the drums. We'll start with the Remo Diplomat coated head. This is the drum that I use most often when I'm gigging. I'll play up through just a bunch of different styles, nothing too fancy, and I'll go through the drums one by one so you can hear the difference in the heads. So right away you hear that pronounced rim shot. Very high pitch, and the drum's wide open, there's no muffling. Now bear in mind that I'm only using 2 overheads and a bass drum mic. There's no close miking going on. The overheads are pretty high up here. So this is sort of a natural room sound that you'd hear. Studio sound would be much closer mic, compression, all that stuff. I'm not using any of that. This is just a live in the room sound because I want you to hear what the drums really sound like. And I do that in all my videos. I don't process anything. You know, there's plenty of YouTube videos with processed drums you can check out. But again, the drum that you hear in a video sometimes, they're doing EQ, they're compressing it, things, and then you get the drum, you're like, what the hell's going on? So this is the way all these drums sound when I play them on the channel. All right, so let's switch to the Aquarian head now, which is a little bit thicker, well, a lot thicker, I should say, twice as thick. And you'll hear that sound, which will be a drier sound. All right. So a much tighter sound, right? Yeah, and not overbearing though, still kind of quiet. Again, there's no muffling at all, so it's kind of a great compromise between a wood and metal drum. That's how I like to think of copper drums, somewhere in the middle there. And now I'll play you the calf head. Now this drum will have a definite personality because of the head, as we saw before. And I'll just play a little bit. Nothing like it with this kind of head. Very dry, almost like a rudimental kind of field drum that's this thick. So extremely tight. Almost like an early Roy Haynes kind of thing, you know. Those really piccolo snares almost that he would use. You know, that snap, crackle, pop kind of sound. So I use this one a lot for playing jazz. It's great with brushes, too. Okay, the calf head. So I hope you hear the difference between all these and you realize how much a drum head can change the way a drum sounds. So if you have a snare drum, it's a nice drum, but you're unhappy with it, go through some different heads. Try a calf head or, you know, whatever. If you don't like using animal skin heads, there's other things like fiber skins, that you can use. This skin tone head that Remo makes that's great. So you can get close, but there's nothing really like the real thing, and it will never wear out unless you break it. Now, they are very expensive. So once again, I will probably put these videos in 2 separate videos and then 1 video, so 3 videos, 1 for the concert snares, 1 for the copper drum set snares, and then 1 for all of them so you can hear all of them sort of together in 1 video. But I highly recommend copper snares. I think they're a great unique voice to add to your sound palette. So we'll play a little, and I'll put this other drum back on here so I can hit a little harder. And that'll be this. Actually, you know what? Let's put the Diplomat on there. So that's a good compromise between the calf and the aquarium head. I find myself using this drum a lot as well.